Blood drained from Vanessa Taylor's face as she recognized the man boarding first class, Dominic Wilson, owner of Celestial Airways. Just hours earlier, she denied his 6-year-old daughter Zoe a blanket, claiming they're reserved for premium passengers. His eyes locked with hers. Recognition dawned. Before we dive into this shocking story, where are you watching from today? If you're ready to see justice unfold in the most unexpected way, hit that like button and subscribe to witness more powerful stories of accountability. Now, let's discover what happens when discrimination meets its match. The day had started like any other for 6-year-old Zoe Wilson. Bright-eyed and curious, she clutched her favorite stuffed elephant as she boarded Celestial Airways Flight 237 from New York to San Francisco. Her nanny, Sandra Johnson, a warm-hearted woman in her late 50s with silver-streaked hair and kind eyes, held her small hand firmly as they navigated the crowded aisle toward their seats in economy class. "Is Daddy going to be waiting at the airport?" Zoe asked, her voice tinged with excitement. She hadn't seen her father in nearly 2 weeks. "Yes, sweetheart," Sandra replied with a smile. "He just finished his big meeting and texted that he'll be there with your favorite ice cream." Dominic Wilson, at 45, was a devoted father despite his demanding role as a tech billionaire. After closing a major business deal that morning, he was eager to reunite with his daughter. Since losing his wife Amanda to cancer 3 years ago, Zoe had become his world, the light that kept him pushing forward. As they settled into their seats, Zoe looked around with wide-eyed wonder. This was only her 3rd time flying, and everything still fascinated her. Sandra helped her buckle her seatbelt and stored their carry-ons. "The air feels funny," Zoe commented, rubbing her arms. The cabin was unusually cold, the air conditioning blasting at full strength despite the mild spring day outside. "You're right," Sandra agreed, feeling the chill herself. "Let me see if we can get you a blanket." The flight was running 20 minutes behind schedule, creating a tense atmosphere. Passengers were restless, flight attendants hurried through pre-flight checks, and the general mood was one of collective irritation. Vanessa Taylor, a senior flight attendant with 15 years at Celestial Airways, moved efficiently through the cabin. At 38, she carried herself with the confidence of someone who knew the airline business inside and out. Her uniform was impeccable, her makeup precise, her blonde hair pulled back in a tight bun that emphasized her sharp features. Sandra raised her hand politely as Vanessa passed their row. "Excuse me, miss. Could we possibly get a blanket for my little one here? It's quite cold." Vanessa stopped abruptly and glanced down. Her gaze swept over Sandra, noting her simple clothing, then moved to Zoe, taking in the child's dark skin and curly hair. Her expression shifted subtly, almost imperceptibly. "I'm sorry," she said, though her tone carried no apology. "Those blankets are reserved for premium passengers only." She gestured vaguely toward the front of the plane where first and business class passengers sat. Sandra frowned. "But she's just a child, and it's very cold in here." Zoe looked up with confused eyes, clutching her elephant tighter. "Please? Ellie is cold too," she said softly, referring to her stuffed animal. Vanessa's lips thinned into a tight line. "That's our policy. We need to make sure our premium passengers have amenities available." She said this despite the clearly visible stack of at least 24 blankets in the nearby overhead compartment. "I've flown this airline many times," Sandra persisted. "I've never heard of such a policy." "Well, perhaps you should consider upgrading next time if amenities are important to you," Vanessa replied with a condescending smile. "It's important to teach children that certain privileges need to be earned or paid for. That's how the world works." The implication hung heavy in the air. Several nearby passengers shifted uncomfortably in their seats, exchanging glances but remaining silent. "Excuse me," called a voice from across the aisle. Blake Richardson, a middle-aged white man in a business suit, raised his hand. "Could I trouble you for a blanket?" Vanessa's demeanor transformed instantly. Her smile warmed, reaching her eyes. "Of course, sir, right away." She promptly retrieved a blanket from the same compartment and handed it to him with a flourish. Please let me know if you need anything else." The contrast was stark and unmistakable. Zoe's small face crumpled in confusion as she watched the man across the aisle unfold his blanket. "Why did he get one?" she whispered to Sandra, hurt evident in her voice. Sandra's jaw tightened, but she maintained her composure for Zoe's sake. With deliberate movements, she pulled out her phone and began recording, capturing Vanessa's retreating figure and then panning to show the blanket being used across the aisle. "It's not right," murmured an elderly woman seated behind them. "That child should have a blanket too." Sandra nodded in agreement, but focused on comforting Zoe. "Sometimes, sweetheart," she explained gently, "people treat others differently because of how they look. It's wrong, and it's not your fault." "Because I'm brown?" Zoe asked with heartbreaking directness. Sandra hesitated, then nodded sadly. "Yes, sometimes because of that. But that says something about them, not about you. You are perfect just as you are." She pulled Zoe close, removing her own light jacket to drape over the child. As Vanessa disappeared into the forward cabin, Sandra discreetly typed out a detailed message to Dominic, attaching the video she'd just recorded. Zoe sat quietly, her earlier excitement dimmed. She was used to being the center of her father's world, surrounded by love and encouragement. This rejection, this sense of being deemed less worthy, was new and confusing. Despite her young age, she felt the sting of injustice keenly. "Your daddy will make this right," Sandra promised, her voice low but firm. "He always does." What neither Vanessa Taylor nor anyone else on that flight realized was that the little girl being denied a simple comfort was the daughter of the very man who signed their paychecks. Dominic Wilson hadn't publicized his acquisition of Celestial Airways widely, preferring to observe operations from a distance before implementing changes. Now, his daughter had inadvertently given him a first-hand look at problems that ran deeper than he'd imagined. As the plane finally took off, Zoe leaned against Sandra's shoulder, her small body still shivering slightly in the chilled cabin. Sandra's phone buzzed with an incoming message. It was from Dominic, containing just 4 words. "I'm handling this personally." Dominic Wilson hadn't always been a billionaire. Born to middle-class parents in Chicago, his childhood was comfortable but far from luxurious. His father taught mathematics at a community college. His mother worked as a nurse. They instilled in him the values of education, hard work, and perseverance, qualities that would serve him well in the face of obstacles that had nothing to do with his abilities and everything to do with his skin color. At 12, Dominic built his first computer from spare parts. At 16, he created his first software program, a simple app that helped his father grade tests more efficiently. By 19, while still in college, he'd started a small software company in his dorm room. Now, at 45, DW Technologies was a global powerhouse, and Dominic Wilson was one of the richest men in America. 2 years ago, seeking to diversify his holdings, he had purchased a controlling interest in Celestial Airways. The airline had been struggling financially but had a solid infrastructure and valuable routes. Most employees were unaware that their company was now owned by a black entrepreneur. Dominic preferred it that way, wanting to observe the corporate culture authentically before making his presence known. Success hadn't shielded Dominic from discrimination. If anything, it had sometimes made it more pronounced, more surprising in its brazenness. There was the time at a banking conference when he was repeatedly mistaken for a server, the real estate agent who mysteriously couldn't show him properties in certain neighborhoods until his assistant, who was white, made the same inquiries and received immediate accommodation. The security guards who followed him through high-end stores even when he was wearing a $5,000 suit. Most painful was the board meeting at his own company 6 years ago, before his reputation was firmly established. He'd arrived early, sitting quietly at the table reviewing documents. As other board members entered, one leaned over to him and asked if he could get everyone coffee before the Wilson fellow arrived. The man's face upon learning he was speaking to Dominic Wilson himself became a memory both amusing and bitter. These experiences shaped him but didn't define him. Dominic channeled his frustration into success, into proving doubters wrong, into building something undeniable. But after his wife Amanda died, his perspective shifted. Amanda, brilliant and fierce, had been his partner in every sense. Her battle with aggressive breast cancer had been brief but brutal, leaving him a widower and single father almost overnight. "Promise me," she had whispered during their final moments together. "Promise me you'll build a better world for her." That promise became his North Star. Every business decision, every investment, every policy he implemented was guided by a simple question. Would this make the world better for Zoe? Would this create a future where his daughter wouldn't face the same barriers, the same indignities, the same need to constantly prove herself worthy of basic respect? His acquisition of Celestial Airways was part of that mission. Transportation connected people, cultures, ideas. An airline that truly valued diversity could set industry standards, could demonstrate that inclusion wasn't just morally right, but good business. Dominic had implemented new hiring practices, revised training protocols, created scholarship programs for underrepresented groups in aviation. The results were promising but incomplete. Policies could be changed with the stroke of a pen. Attitudes were harder to transform. His relationship with Zoe was the center of his world. Despite his demanding schedule, he prioritized quality time with his daughter, helping with homework, attending dance recitals, creating weekend adventures. She was bright and perceptive, with her mother's smile and determination. Dominic saw glimpses of the remarkable woman she would become, and it strengthened his resolve to smooth her path without removing all challenges that would help her grow strong. Sandra Johnson had been Amanda's childhood friend before becoming Zoe's nanny. After Amanda's death, her presence provided crucial continuity and feminine guidance. Dominic trusted her implicitly, not just with Zoe's physical safety, but with her emotional well-being. Sandra understood what it meant to raise a black child in America. She helped prepare Zoe for a world that might not always see her brilliance first. His current project in San Francisco was particularly close to his heart. A complete overhaul of airline customer service standards focused on equity and respect. The irony that his own daughter was experiencing the very problem he aimed to solve wasn't lost on him. When Sandra's message arrived with the video attachment, Dominic was in the middle of a meeting with his executive team. He excused himself to watch it privately, his expression darkening with each second. The casual cruelty displayed toward his daughter triggered a familiar pain, one he'd hoped she wouldn't have to experience so young. But beneath the pain was resolve. This wasn't just about Zoe anymore. It was about every child who had ever been deemed less deserving because of their appearance. He immediately canceled his remaining meetings and changed his travel plans. Rather than sending his driver to meet Zoe and Sandra at the airport as originally planned, he would be there personally, and he would be taking the same Celestial Airways flight back to New York the following day, coincidentally serviced by the same crew, including one Vanessa Taylor. "Get me everything we have on our customer service training programs," he instructed his assistant before heading to the airport, "and the personnel file for Vanessa Taylor." As he drove to San Francisco International Airport, Dominic recalled a conversation with Zoe just weeks earlier. "Daddy," she had asked, "why do you own an airplane company if we still have to buy tickets?" He had laughed and explained the difference between owning a company and using its services. "Everyone gets treated the same when they buy a ticket, Princess. That's how it should be." Now, that explanation felt hollow. Everyone should be treated the same, but they weren't. His wealth and position hadn't protected his daughter from discrimination. If anything, this incident proved what he had always known. No amount of money could fully shield a black child from racism. As Dominic arrived at the terminal to meet Zoe's flight, his phone buzzed with an update. His assistant had found multiple complaints against Vanessa Taylor in the HR database, all dismissed without investigation. The problem ran deeper than one flight attendant. It was systemic, woven into the company culture he had inherited but not yet transformed. Tomorrow, on the return flight, Vanessa Taylor would learn exactly who owned Celestial Airways, and Dominic Wilson would begin a reckoning long overdue. Have you ever witnessed someone's face when they realize they've made a catastrophic mistake? If you believe in accountability for discriminatory actions, type justice in the comments and hit the like button. Now, what would you do if you were in Dominic's position? Would you reveal your identity immediately or observe a bit longer? Let's see how this powerful father handles the situation. The first-class cabin of Celestial Airways Flight 892 from San Francisco to New York gleamed with polished surfaces and premium amenities. Vanessa Taylor moved efficiently through her pre-flight routine, checking passenger comfort with practiced precision. 20 minutes before departure, the distinctive chime announced the beginning of boarding procedures. Vanessa straightened her uniform and plastered on her professional smile as the first passengers began to board. Her eyes widened slightly as a tall, impeccably dressed black man approached the first row. Something about him seemed vaguely familiar, but she couldn't immediately place him. "Good morning, sir. Welcome aboard," she greeted mechanically, glancing at his boarding pass. "Mr. Wilson, you're in seat 1A. Can I offer you a pre-flight beverage?" Dominic Wilson nodded politely. "Sparkling water, please. No ice." As Vanessa turned to prepare his drink, she noticed something unusual. The captain and co-pilot had emerged from the cockpit, something they rarely did during boarding. Both approached Dominic with obvious deference. "Mr. Wilson, it's an honor to have you on board today," the captain said, extending his hand. "If there's anything you need during the flight, please don't hesitate to let us know." "Thank you, Captain Bradley," Dominic replied, shaking his hand. "I'm looking forward to a smooth flight." Vanessa paused, glass in hand. The captain knew this passenger by name, and the passenger knew the captain's name. She delivered the sparkling water and retreated to the galley, mind racing. As more first-class passengers boarded, she discreetly checked the manifest on her tablet. Dominic Wilson. The name alone told her nothing specific, but the special notation beside it sent a chill down her spine. VIP priority. Vanessa's thoughts flashed back to yesterday's flight from New York. The little black girl asking for a blanket. The woman with her recording the interaction. The hollow feeling in her stomach grew as pieces began connecting in her mind. During takeoff, Vanessa found herself sneaking glances at Dominic. There was an unmistakable aura of authority about him, the quiet confidence of someone accustomed to being in charge. When their eyes briefly met, his gaze was analytical, as if he were assessing her worth with a single look. She quickly averted her eyes. Her mind drifted to her childhood in Riverdale, an affluent, predominantly white suburb of New York. Her parents had worked hard to provide that life, to ensure she attended good schools and moved in the right circles. They had never explicitly taught prejudice, but the lessons were implicit in their choices, their comments, their warnings about changing neighborhoods. "Flight attendants, prepare for service," came the announcement over the intercom, snapping Vanessa back to the present. As she moved through the cabin distributing hot towels and taking meal orders, Vanessa found herself acutely aware of how she interacted with different passengers. The easy banter with the older white couple in 2C and 2D. The slightly more formal tone with the Asian businessman in 3B. The briefer, more perfunctory exchange with the young Middle Eastern woman in 4A. Had she always done this? Created these subtle hierarchies of attention and warmth based on unconscious categorizations? From his seat, Dominic observed it all. The different smiles, the varying degrees of attention, the subtle ways value was assigned and service allocated. It confirmed what Sandra's video had shown. Vanessa's behavior toward Zoe hadn't been an isolated incident, but part of a pattern. Halfway through the flight, as the cabin settled into the quiet lull following meal service, Dominic pressed his call button. The soft chime echoed through the cabin. "Yes, sir?" Another flight attendant responded, approaching his seat. "I'd like to speak with the head flight attendant, please," Dominic requested. "Of course. That would be Ms. Taylor. I'll get her for you right away." Vanessa had been organizing the galley when her colleague delivered the message. She froze momentarily, then composed herself and walked deliberately to seat 1A. "How can I help you, Mr. Wilson?" she asked, her voice professional but tight. "I'm conducting an anonymous audit of customer service standards across Celestial Airways," Dominic said smoothly. Would you mind answering a few questions about your approach to passenger care?
Of course,
Vanessa replied, unease growing. Excellent. First, could you clarify the airline's policy regarding blanket distribution? The question hit like a physical blow. Vanessa struggled to maintain her composure.
Blankets are available to all passengers upon request, as supplies allow,
she recited from the service manual. Interesting, Dominic nodded. And is there any official policy restricting blankets to premium passengers only?
No, sir,
Vanessa admitted, a flush creeping up her neck.
There is not.
I see. Dominic's voice remained calm, but his eyes were intent. And in your 15 years with Celestial, have you found that all passengers receive equal treatment regardless of their appearance, age, or apparent economic status? Vanessa's mouth went dry. We strive to provide excellent service to everyone, she answered automatically. That wasn't my question, Ms. Taylor, Dominic pressed. I asked if all passengers actually receive equal treatment. The silence stretched between them, taut with tension. Finally, Vanessa spoke, her voice barely above a whisper.
I believe there's always room for improvement.
Indeed, Dominic agreed. One final question. Do you recall a young passenger on yesterday's flight from New York to San Francisco? A 6-year-old girl who requested a blanket? The blood drained from Vanessa's face. There it was, confirmation of her growing suspicion. This wasn't a random audit. This was targeted, personal.
There are many passengers each day,
she stammered. Perhaps this will refresh your memory, Dominic said, turning his tablet to show her the video Sandra had recorded. Vanessa watched in horror as her own face appeared on screen, her dismissive treatment of Zoe captured in high definition. When the video ended, she looked up to find Dominic studying her reaction. I'll need your employee information for my report, he said evenly. And Ms. Taylor, I wouldn't make any long-term career plans with Celestial Airways if I were you. As Vanessa retreated to the galley, legs unsteady beneath her, the realization crashed over her like a wave. Dominic Wilson wasn't just any VIP. The little girl she denied a blanket wasn't just any child. Somehow, some way, she had managed to discriminate against the daughter of someone powerful enough to end her career with a single word. What she didn't yet realize was that Dominic Wilson wasn't merely powerful within Celestial Airways. He owned it. Before Dominic Wilson acquired Celestial Airways, the company had projected a polished image of sophistication and exclusivity. Its marketing showcased gleaming aircraft and smiling passengers, mostly white and affluent-looking, enjoying premium services. Behind this carefully cultivated facade, however, lay a corporate culture riddled with discrimination and elitism. The airline had been founded 30 years earlier by brothers Richard and Thomas Bradshaw, scions of old money who viewed the business primarily as a status symbol. They hired people who reflected their own background and outlook, predominantly white, educated at the right schools, and steeped in certain social expectations. This hiring bias had created a workforce that remained surprisingly homogeneous despite decades of supposed progress in the industry. Vanessa Taylor had thrived in this environment. Hired straight out of college with a tourism management degree, she had quickly adapted to the unwritten rules. Cater to those who looked like they belonged in first class. Be efficient, but not especially warm to those who didn't. Never explicitly refuse service based on race or appearance. That would be illegal. But find plausible pretexts when necessary. This approach had earned her multiple promotions and the approval of management. It had also generated numerous complaints that never saw meaningful action. Third complaint this quarter about Taylor, HR assistant Jasmine Rodriguez had noted in an email to her director, Curtis Parker, 8 months before the incident with Zoe. Passenger claims discriminatory treatment when requesting assistance with luggage. Curtis had responded within minutes. Same as usual? File it. Send the standard response letter. No further action needed. This exchange was one of dozens Dominic's team discovered when investigating the company's handling of discrimination complaints. The pattern was clear and disturbing. Reports involving certain staff members, Vanessa prominently among them, were consistently dismissed without investigation. Curtis Parker, the HR director who had facilitated this system, now sat nervously in his office reviewing Vanessa's personnel file. At 52, he had spent his entire career at Celestial, rising through ranks by being a team player who protected the company's interests, as defined by the Bradshaw brothers. The news that Dominic Wilson would be meeting with him in an hour had sent him into a panic. "You need to understand the culture here," Thomas Bradshaw had told Dominic during acquisition negotiations. "Our clients expect a certain ambiance. We cater to a discerning clientele." The coded language hadn't been lost on Dominic, but he had chosen to address the issue systematically rather than through immediate upheaval. In retrospect, perhaps that had been a mistake. "I've received troubling information about passenger treatment," Dominic had said during his first executive meeting after the acquisition. "I'd like us to implement comprehensive anti-bias training for all customer-facing staff." Thomas Bradshaw, who had stayed on as Chief Operations Officer, had nodded agreeably while immediately undermining the initiative behind the scenes. "Standard corporate nonsense," he told his leadership team privately. "Go through the motions, but don't let it change how we operate. Our premium passengers don't pay top dollar to have the same experience as someone who bought a discount ticket." When specific incidents were brought to his attention, Bradshaw consistently downplayed their significance. "Isolated incidents," he would say dismissively. "Let's not overreact to one passenger having a bad day." The training sessions Vanessa and other staff had attended were comprehensive in content but treated as mere formalities. Employees signed attendance sheets, collected their certification, and continued behaving exactly as before. "Did you see that diversity training video?" Vanessa had laughed with colleague Eric Peterson after one session. "As if I'm going to spend extra time helping someone who can barely afford to be on the flight while keeping our actual valuable customers waiting." Eric had chuckled uncomfortably. "Maybe just don't say that part out loud, Van." These conversations, these attitudes, this entire culture was what Dominic had been working to transform, slowly, perhaps too slowly, from behind the scenes. The incident with Zoe had thrown into stark relief how much remained unchanged despite his efforts. Now, as evidence mounted of systematic discrimination throughout the company, Dominic realized more drastic measures were needed. The statistics his team compiled were damning. Complaints from passengers of color were 3 times more likely to be dismissed without investigation than those from white passengers. Employees from minority backgrounds were twice as likely to be disciplined for minor infractions that white employees routinely got away with. Promotion rates showed clear disparities even when controlling for experience and performance metrics. Curtis Parker's phone rang, startling him from his anxious review of files. "Mr. Wilson's plane has landed," his assistant informed him. "He's requesting an emergency meeting in the main boardroom in 30 minutes. All executive staff are required to attend. And he's bringing Vanessa Taylor." Across town, Thomas Bradshaw received the same call. "What's this about?" he demanded. "I have a lunch meeting with investors." "Mr. Wilson was very clear that this takes priority, sir," the assistant replied. "He specifically mentioned it concerns customer service standards and company values." Bradshaw cursed under his breath. "Fine, tell him I'll be there." As Dominic's town car pulled away from the airport, Vanessa sat rigid in the back seat, hands clasped tightly in her lap. She had been instructed to accompany him directly to headquarters without explanation. The sleek vehicle moved through New York traffic while Vanessa's mind raced through scenarios, none of them good. "Ms. Taylor," Dominic finally spoke, breaking the tense silence. "Do you know who I am?" "A VIP client conducting an audit," she replied cautiously. Dominic smiled thinly. "That's partly correct. I am conducting an audit, but not as a client." He handed her his business card, watching as her eyes widened at the title beneath his name, CEO and Chairman, DW Technologies. "I don't understand," she said, confusion evident in her voice. "What does your technology company have to do with Celestial Airways?" 2 years ago, DW Technologies acquired Celestial Airways as a wholly owned subsidiary, Dominic explained calmly. I've kept a low profile while assessing operations and implementing changes behind the scenes. Yesterday, my daughter Zoe and her nanny Sandra were on your flight from New York to San Francisco. The final piece clicked into place. Vanessa's face went ashen as the full implications hit her.
The little girl who wanted a blanket, she whispered.
The little girl you denied a blanket while giving one to a white passenger minutes later, Dominic corrected, his voice still measured but with an edge of steel beneath. My daughter. Vanessa opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. Save your explanations for the meeting, Dominic said, turning to look out the window. I think it's time for Celestial Airways to have an honest conversation about who we are and who we want to be. As the car pulled up to company headquarters, Dominic's phone buzzed with a message from his assistant. Boardroom ready. All executives present except Bradshaw, arriving momentarily. We'll wait for him, Dominic decided as he guided Vanessa through the lobby toward the elevators. Employees stopped and stared as they passed, whispering behind hands at the unusual sight of the owner himself escorting a flight attendant through their midst. The stage was set for a confrontation that would shake Celestial Airways to its foundations and force everyone involved to examine biases too long ignored. For Vanessa Taylor, it would be the most difficult meeting of her life. For Dominic Wilson, it represented the beginning of the transformation he had promised his late wife, building a better world for their daughter, one confrontation at a time. The Celestial Airways boardroom exuded corporate prestige, mahogany table gleaming under recessed lighting, floor-to-ceiling windows offering panoramic views of Manhattan, oil paintings of the company's first aircraft adorning walls paneled in rich cherry wood. Vanessa Taylor had passed this room countless times during her 15 years with the airline, but had never stepped inside. Now she stood uncertainly near the doorway as executives in tailored suits exchanged tense glances. Her uniform, usually a source of pride, felt suddenly conspicuous among their business attire. Dominic Wilson entered last, his presence immediately commanding attention. Without preamble, he took his place at the head of the table and gestured for Vanessa to sit in a chair positioned prominently to his right. For those who haven't had the pleasure, I'm Dominic Wilson, he began, his voice resonant in the hushed room. 2 years ago, my company acquired Celestial Airways. I've spent that time observing operations and implementing gradual changes to improve performance across all metrics. He paused, surveying the faces around the table. Yesterday, I received a disturbing glimpse into aspects of our corporate culture that remain deeply problematic. Ms. Taylor, would you care to explain to everyone what happened on Flight 237 from New York to San Francisco? Vanessa straightened in her chair, drawing confidence from years of managing difficult situations. She was senior staff. She had connections. This would be uncomfortable but survivable. There appears to have been a misunderstanding regarding our blanket policy, she began smoothly. During a busy flight, I had to make quick decisions about resource allocation. A misunderstanding, Dominic repeated, his tone neutral. Let's clarify then. He pressed a button on a remote control, and the wall screen illuminated with Sandra's video recording. The footage played in high definition, capturing every detail of the interaction. Vanessa's dismissive tone when refusing Zoe's request, her immediate accommodation of the white male passenger, Sandra's quiet dignity in the face of discrimination. When it ended, the room remained silent for several uncomfortable seconds. The child in that video, Dominic said quietly, is my daughter, Zoe. Thomas Bradshaw, who had arrived moments before the meeting began, leaned forward with an ingratiating smile. Dominic, while this is obviously unfortunate, I think we need to maintain perspective. One isolated incident. This is not isolated, Dominic cut him off, pressing the remote again. The screen switched to a spreadsheet. This is a log of complaints filed against Ms. Taylor over the past 5 years. 37 complaints alleging discriminatory treatment. 0 investigations conducted, 0 consequences imposed. He clicked again, revealing another document. This is an internal email from HR Director Curtis Parker, instructing his staff to handle the Taylor situations as usual. Mr. Parker, would you care to explain what as usual means in this context? Curtis Parker's face had gone sickly pale. It's standard procedure to review complaints for validity before proceeding with formal investigations, he stammered. And your criteria for validity? Dominic pressed. We consider the source, consistency with company policies, potential for reputational damage. Curtis trailed off, realizing how damning his own words sounded. Vanessa's initial confidence was evaporating rapidly. She had assumed her connections within the company would protect her as they always had. Now, watching those same colleagues distance themselves with their silence, she felt suddenly exposed. I've always followed the unofficial guidelines, she blurted out defensively. Premium passengers receive priority attention. That's how it's always been. Unofficial guidelines, Dominic repeated. Interesting choice of words. Who provided these unofficial guidelines, Ms. Taylor? Vanessa glanced nervously at Thomas Bradshaw. It's just understood. Part of the culture. Dominic nodded thoughtfully. Mr. Bradshaw, as Chief Operations Officer, what are your thoughts on this understood culture? Bradshaw straightened his tie, buying time. Celestial Airways has always prided itself on exceptional service. Sometimes that means making judgment calls about resource allocation. Based on what criteria? Dominic asked. Age, race, perceived economic status? Of course not, Bradshaw protested. That would be inappropriate and illegal. And yet, Dominic continued, clicking to display another document. Here's an email from you to the senior cabin crew 3 months ago stating, remember who pays our premium prices and focus your attention accordingly. Would you care to elaborate on what you meant by that? Bradshaw's face flushed. That was about identifying business travelers who might upgrade in the future, not about discrimination. Is that so? Dominic turned back to Vanessa. Ms. Taylor, in your experience, how was this guidance typically interpreted? Put on the spot, Vanessa hesitated. Her career hung in the balance, but the evidence against her was already damning. We understood it to mean focus on passengers who looked like they belonged in first class, she admitted finally. And what does someone who belongs in first class look like, in your estimation? Dominic asked. The question hung in the air, its implications impossible to ignore. Vanessa opened her mouth, then closed it again, realizing there was no acceptable answer. Let me tell you about my daughter, Dominic said, his voice softening slightly. Zoe is 6 years old. She loves elephants, strawberry ice cream, and dance class. She's learning to read chapter books and can already do multiplication. She is bright, compassionate, and curious about the world. His expression hardened again. Yesterday, she learned that sometimes people will decide she doesn't deserve basic comfort or courtesy based solely on her appearance. He stood up, commanding the room with his presence. I'm one of the richest men in America. I own this airline and a dozen other companies. I've had dinner with presidents and prime ministers, and yet, his voice carried a controlled anger now. None of that protected my 6-year-old black daughter from being deemed less worthy of a simple blanket than the white man sitting across from her. The executives shifted uncomfortably in their seats, avoiding eye contact. I'm not sharing this for sympathy, Dominic continued. I'm illustrating that what happened to Zoe isn't about one flight attendant or one incident. It's about a culture that permits and even encourages treating people differently based on appearance. A culture that's been allowed to fester under leadership that should know better. Vanessa, seeing her career crumbling before her eyes, made a desperate attempt to salvage the situation. Mr. Wilson, I sincerely apologize for the misunderstanding. If I had known she was your daughter, that's precisely the problem, Dominic interrupted, his voice sharp. You shouldn't need to know who someone's father is to treat them with basic dignity. The fact that you think that's a reasonable defense tells me everything about the values that have been normalized in this company. Tears welled in Vanessa's eyes, but they were tears of fear and self-pity rather than genuine remorse. Please, I need this job. I've given 15 years to Celestial. And during those 15 years, how many passengers have experienced discrimination at your hands? Dominic asked. How many children have you taught that they're somehow less deserving than others? Vanessa had no answer. Thomas Bradshaw, seeing the direction the meeting was taking, attempted damage control. Dominic, we take this very seriously, of course. We'll implement additional training immediately. Perhaps a written warning for Ms. Taylor. A written warning? Dominic's laugh was without humor. Mr. Bradshaw, let me be clear. Vanessa Taylor's employment with Celestial Airways ends today, as does yours. The pronouncement landed like a thunderclap in the hushed room. You can't be serious, Bradshaw sputtered. I built this company. And you built it on a foundation of discrimination, Dominic replied evenly. You created and maintained a culture where employees understood they should treat passengers differently based on how they look. That ends today. He turned to address the entire room. Effective immediately, I am announcing a comprehensive overhaul of Celestial Airways policies, practices, and leadership. Curtis Parker, you have until the end of the day to submit your resignation. The rest of you have a choice to make. Embrace the new direction of this company or follow Mr. Bradshaw out the door. Vanessa sat in stunned silence as security was called to escort her from the building. 15 years of career advancement evaporated in a single meeting. As she gathered her belongings under the watchful eye of a security guard, the magnitude of her mistake finally began to sink in. She had denied a blanket to the daughter of the man who owned the entire airline. But more importantly, she had revealed the prejudice that had guided her actions all along. Thomas Bradshaw departed with less dignity, his face red with anger as he threatened lawsuits and proclaimed his innocence. His protests fell on deaf ears as Dominic Wilson turned his attention to the remaining executives, outlining his vision for a transformed Celestial Airways. This company will become a model for equity and inclusion in the airline industry, he told them firmly. Not because it's trendy or politically correct, but because it's right, it's necessary, and ultimately, it's good business. The question each of you needs to answer is whether you want to be part of that transformation. As the meeting concluded, Dominic remained in the boardroom alone, looking out over the New York skyline. He thought of Zoe, of the promise he'd made to Amanda, of the world he wanted his daughter to inherit. Today's actions were just the beginning of fulfilling that promise. Outside the boardroom, whispers spread through Celestial Airways headquarters. Change was coming, and it would be swift and comprehensive. For some, it represented long overdue justice. For others, a threatening disruption to the status quo. For everyone, it signaled the end of business as usual. Have you ever seen how quickly a private incident can become a public reckoning? If you believe companies should be held accountable for discrimination, type accountability in the comments. And if you've ever witnessed or experienced similar treatment, hit that like button to show solidarity. The question that haunts every business today is, when your company's values are tested in real time, will you pass or fail? Let's see how the public responds to this shocking incident. The video hit Twitter at 8:17 a.m. Eastern Time. By 8:32 a.m., it had been retweeted 10,000 times. By 9 o'clock a.m., major news outlets were reaching out to Celestial Airways for comment. By noon, the clip had been viewed over 2 million times, with the hashtags #blankets while black and Celestial Airways racism trending nationwide. Sandra Johnson had not released the video. Neither had Dominic Wilson. It appeared to have come from another passenger on the flight, someone who had captured the interaction from a different angle and decided the world needed to see it. Damage control meeting in 5 minutes, announced Layla Washington, Celestial Airways' newly promoted Chief Communications Officer, as she strode purposefully through the PR department. At 42, Layla was one of the few black executives at the company before Dominic's acquisition. Her talent had been consistently overlooked by the previous leadership, but Dominic had immediately recognized her capabilities. "What's our statement?" asked James Chen, her deputy, hurrying to keep pace. "We acknowledge, we apologize, we act," Layla replied crisply. "No deflection, no excuses." Inside the conference room, her team of 10 communications professionals looked simultaneously exhausted and wired on too much coffee. Multiple screens displayed the unfolding crisis across various platforms. Current situation, Layla began without preamble. Video of a celestial flight attendant denying a blanket to a black child while providing one to a white man is going viral. The flight attendant has been identified on social media as Vanessa Taylor. Multiple news outlets are reporting that the child is the daughter of our owner, Dominic Wilson, though this hasn't been officially confirmed. Our stock is down 12% since market open, added the financial communications specialist. Analysts are questioning leadership and culture. Layla nodded grimly. We need to get ahead of this. Draft statements for immediate release. Coordinate with legal, and prepare Mr. Wilson if he chooses to speak publicly. Meanwhile, across town in her small apartment, Vanessa Taylor stared in horror at her phone. Her name and face were everywhere, usually accompanied by the words racist, fired, and Celestial Airways. Her social media accounts were flooded with angry messages. News vans had gathered outside her building. She had spent the morning alternating between panic attacks and desperate calls to former colleagues, most of whom suddenly couldn't talk. Thomas Bradshaw wasn't answering her calls. Her union representative had informed her tersely that given the video evidence, there were limited grounds for challenging her termination. "This is completely unfair," she said aloud to her empty living room. "I was just doing my job the way they taught me to." Even as the words left her mouth, she recognized their hollowness. Her phone buzzed with a text from her mother. "CNN is showing that video again. Call me." Vanessa turned off her phone instead. At Dominic Wilson's Manhattan penthouse, a different kind of crisis management was underway. Sandra sat with Zoe in the playroom, carefully monitoring what information reached the child's ears. "Why are there so many people outside our building?" Zoe asked, peering curiously out the window at the gathered press below. "They're just doing their jobs, sweetheart," Sandra replied, gently guiding her away from the window. "How about we finish that puzzle we started yesterday?" In his home office, Dominic was on a video call with his executive team and crisis management consultants. "The public is demanding a response from you personally," advised Rebecca Goldstein, the lead consultant. "Your silence is being interpreted as corporate stonewalling." "My priority is protecting my daughter's privacy," Dominic replied firmly. "She's 6 years old. I won't make her the face of this controversy." "With respect, sir," Rebecca countered, "the story is out there already. By not speaking, you're allowing others to control the narrative." Dominic rubbed his temples, feeling the weight of competing responsibilities. To his daughter, to his company, to the broader issues at stake. "What about the employee?" he asked. "Vanessa Taylor. What's happening with her?" "She's receiving death threats," reported Layla Washington. "So is our headquarters. We've increased security at all locations." "Death threats?" Dominic repeated incredulously. "Over a blanket?" "Not just a blanket, sir," Layla corrected gently. "This incident has become symbolic of something much larger. People are projecting their own experiences onto it." Outside in the real world and across the digital landscape, the story continued to evolve and divide. Some commentators defended Vanessa, claiming she was being scapegoated for following company culture. Others pointed out that discrimination in customer service was so normalized that many didn't even recognize it as problematic. Competing airlines sensed opportunity in Celestial's crisis. Delta issued a statement reaffirming their commitment to serving all passengers with equal respect. United announced a review of their own customer service practices. American Airlines promoted a limited-time offer: blankets for everyone, regardless of ticket class. Inside the Wilson penthouse, Sandra's phone buzzed continuously with interview requests. Morning shows, evening news, talk shows, podcasts. Everyone wanted to hear from the nanny who had stood up for her charge. Most concerning were the requests coming through her personal email and social profiles. How had they found her so quickly? "I'm not doing any interviews," she told Dominic firmly. "My job is to protect Zoe, not become a public figure." Dominic nodded gratefully. "Thank you. I don't know what we'd do without you." Later that evening, after Zoe had gone to bed, Dominic sat with Sandra reviewing the day's developments. "The company's stock has stabilized," he reported. Our statement acknowledging the incident and announcing immediate changes seems to have helped.
And Vanessa Taylor? Sandra asked. What happens to her?
She was fired, along with several executives who enabled the discriminatory culture, Dominic replied. Beyond that, her future isn't my concern. Sandra studied him thoughtfully.
You know this isn't just about one flight attendant or one airline, don't you?
This is about patterns so deeply embedded in society that most people don't even notice them until they're pointed out.
I know, Dominic sighed. That's what makes it so difficult to address. How do you solve a problem that many people refuse to acknowledge exists?
You start by using your voice, Sandra said simply. You have a platform most people don't. Use it. Their conversation was interrupted by Zoe padding into the room in her pajamas, clutching her stuffed elephant.
I had a bad dream, she said, climbing onto her father's lap. The lady on the plane came back and took Ellie away.
Dominic held his daughter close, rage and heartbreak mingling in his chest. This was the true cost of discrimination. Not stock prices or public relations challenges, but the sense of security stolen from a child. No one will take anything from you, he promised, kissing the top of her head. And tomorrow, I'm going to talk to some people about making sure what happened to you doesn't happen to other children. After tucking Zoe back into bed, Dominic made his decision. He called Rebecca Goldstein. Set up the interview, he instructed. National morning show, live segment. But on my terms. No exploitation of my daughter. No images of her without my explicit approval. This isn't about creating sympathy for Zoe. It's about addressing a systemic problem. When he hung up, he stood at the window looking out at the New York skyline, city lights glittering like earthbound stars. Somewhere out there, thousands of parents were having difficult conversations with their children about why the world sometimes treated them differently. Parents who didn't have his resources or platform to demand change. Tomorrow, he would speak for them too. The ABC studio hummed with pre-broadcast activity as makeup artists, producers, and camera operators prepared for the morning show's most anticipated segment. Dominic Wilson sat in the guest chair, microphone being adjusted by a technician, expression composed but determined. "We're live in 60 seconds, called the floor director. Across America, millions of viewers tuned in, drawn by the viral story of discrimination that had sparked a national conversation. In living rooms, airports, gyms, and offices, screens displayed the morning show hosts introducing their guest. Joining us exclusively this morning is Dominic Wilson, tech billionaire and owner of Celestial Airways, speaking for the first time about the viral video showing his daughter being denied a blanket due to racial discrimination. Mr. Wilson, thank you for being here. Thank you for having me, Dominic replied, his deep voice steady and measured. Let's address what everyone is talking about, the host began. The video showing your 6-year-old daughter being refused a blanket while a white passenger received one moments later has sparked outrage nationwide. What was your reaction when you first saw that footage? Dominic paused briefly, choosing his words carefully. My first reaction was as a father. Pain that my child experienced rejection based on how she looks. Anger that someone made her feel less worthy. But my second reaction was as a business leader. Recognition that this incident reflects systemic issues that extend far beyond one employee or one company. You've taken decisive action, firing the flight attendant involved and several executives. Some have criticized this as an overreaction to a single incident. How do you respond? This wasn't a single incident, Dominic clarified firmly. Our internal investigation revealed a pattern of discriminatory behavior that had been repeatedly reported and consistently ignored by leadership. What happened to my daughter was simply the visible tip of a much larger iceberg. The interview continued, with Dominic balancing vulnerability and authority as he shared personal experiences. I've been followed by security in my own office building, he revealed. I've been asked to show additional ID when using my premium credit card. I've had people assume I'm a server or assistant at business functions I'm hosting. He leaned forward slightly, his gaze direct and unwavering. What made this incident different wasn't that discrimination occurred. That happens daily to people of color across America. What made it different was that it was captured on video. It happened to the child of someone with power to demand accountability, and it exposed practices that many companies pretend don't exist. In a small apartment in Queens, Vanessa Taylor watched the interview with growing discomfort. For the first time, she was hearing directly from the man whose daughter she had humiliated. His calm dignity made her previous defensiveness seem increasingly petty and self-serving. "What do you say to those who claim this is just about customer service, not race?" the host asked. "I'd ask them to watch the video again," Dominic responded. "Notice how quickly the same blanket that was only for premium passengers became available when requested by a white man. Notice the different tone of voice, the different level of respect. These distinctions may seem subtle to those who don't experience them regularly, but they're unmistakable to those of us who do." In the Wilson penthouse, Zoe sat cross-legged on the floor, watching her father on television. Sandra sat beside her, ready to answer questions or change the channel if the content became too upsetting. "Daddy looks serious," Zoe observed. "He's talking about important things," Sandra explained. "He's trying to make sure other children don't feel bad like you did on the plane." Zoe considered this, hugging her stuffed elephant close. "He's being a superhero," she decided with the simple clarity of childhood. The interview shifted to discuss Sandra's role in the incident. "Your daughter's nanny, Sandra Johnson, has declined all interview requests," the host noted. "But she played a crucial role in documenting what happened. Can you tell us about her?" "Sandra has been part of our family for years," Dominic replied. "She was my late wife's closest friend before becoming Zoe's nanny. Like many black parents and caregivers, Sandra has had to prepare Zoe for encounters with prejudice, teaching her that such treatment reflects poorly on those who discriminate, not on her." The camera cut to a brief pre-recorded segment where Sandra had agreed to speak, though she had refused to appear live. "Children notice how they're treated differently, even when adults think they don't," Sandra said in the recorded clip. "I've had to explain to Zoe why security guards sometimes follow us in stores, why people occasionally move away from us on public transportation. No child should have to understand racism at 6 years old, but black children often don't have the luxury of ignorance." Back in the studio, the host asked about Celestial Airways' future. "We're implementing comprehensive changes," Dominic explained. "New training protocols, revised service standards, anonymous testing, and most importantly, accountability at every level. We're also establishing a scholarship program for minority students interested in aviation careers." He paused, then continued with greater intensity. "But I want to be clear. This isn't just about Celestial Airways. I'm inviting leaders across the airline industry, across all industries, to join this initiative. Discrimination in customer service isn't unique to one company. It's a reflection of broader societal biases that we all have a responsibility to address." The interview concluded with Dominic's most powerful statement yet. "My wealth and position couldn't protect my daughter from experiencing discrimination, but they do give me the ability to demand change in response. I recognize that privilege, and I intend to use it not just for Zoe, but for every child who deserves to be treated with equal dignity regardless of how they look." As the broadcast ended, social media erupted with reactions. The hashtag #EqualDignity began trending alongside clips of Dominic's most impactful statements. Competing airlines, initially eager to capitalize on Celestial's PR disaster, found themselves under pressure to match Dominic's commitments. Delta announced a review of their own complaint handling procedures. United pledged to implement similar anonymous testing protocols. American Airlines reached out privately to discuss joining the scholarship initiative. Industry analysts noted a remarkable shift in the conversation, from crisis management to industry-wide introspection about service standards and unconscious bias. By evening, Celestial Airways stock had not only recovered its losses, but gained 3% above its pre-crisis level. Market analysts attributed this to investor confidence in Dominic's leadership and recognition of the potential long-term benefits of improved customer service standards. As Dominic returned home, emotionally drained but satisfied with the impact of his message, he found Zoe waiting eagerly by the door. "Did you fix it, Daddy?" she asked, jumping into his arms. "Did you make it better for everyone?" Dominic held his daughter close, smiling at her innocent optimism. "I started to, sweetheart. These things take time to fix completely. But today was a good beginning." Later, after Zoe was asleep, Dominic received an unexpected email. The subject line read simply, "I understand now." It was from Vanessa Taylor. The unemployment check felt like a physical manifestation of failure in Vanessa Taylor's hand. 6 weeks had passed since her very public firing from Celestial Airways, and despite submitting dozens of applications, no airline would touch her. Her name and face had become synonymous with discrimination in customer service, a cautionary tale in corporate America. "They're making an example of me," she complained to her mother over the phone. 15 years of excellent service, and they throw me under the bus for one mistake." "Was it really just one mistake, Vanessa?" her mother asked gently. "Or was it the one time you got caught?" The question landed like a slap. Vanessa ended the call shortly after, retreating into the increasingly familiar combination of self-pity and indignation that had characterized her week since the incident. Her apartment, once meticulously maintained, had fallen into disarray. Much like her life, takeout containers crowded the coffee table. Unopened mail piled up near the door. The flight attendant uniform she had once worn with pride hung in the closet, a painful reminder of the career she had lost. The court-mandated sensitivity training had begun the previous week, part of the settlement agreement that had kept her from facing a civil lawsuit. Vanessa had initially approached it with resentment, viewing it as an unfair punishment rather than an opportunity for growth. "Discriminatory behavior often stems from unconscious bias," explained Dr. Elaine Rodriguez, the psychologist leading the training. "We all absorb messages from our environment about who deserves respect, who belongs in which spaces, who is automatically suspicious." Vanessa had sat stiffly in the circle of participants, arms crossed defensively. "I'm not racist," she had insisted. "I've never used slurs or refused service outright to anyone based on race." "Discrimination isn't always about what we do consciously," Dr. Rodriguez had explained patiently. "It's often about the automatic associations and assumptions we make without realizing it." The training had required participants to keep a journal documenting moments when they observed themselves making snap judgments about others. Initially resistant, Vanessa had begun to notice patterns in her thinking that disturbed her. In line at the grocery store, she had automatically assumed a well-dressed black man would cut in front of her, only to find him politely waiting his turn. At the bank, she had chosen a white teller over an equally available Asian one without consciously deciding to do so. Small moments, seemingly insignificant, but revealing of deeper patterns. "Look back at your entries," Dr. Rodriguez instructed during the second session. "What patterns do you notice? What assumptions are you making, and where did you learn them?" The question had stayed with Vanessa, prompting uncomfortable reflections on her upbringing in Riverdale. Her parents' subtle messaging about which neighborhoods were safe, which schools were good, which friends were appropriate. Today's session would be different. The facilitator had announced they would be joined by someone with a unique perspective on bias in customer service. Michael Thompson, a former airline executive who had been fired from a different carrier for similar issues 5 years earlier. "I thought my career was over," Michael told the group, his voice carrying the weight of hard-earned wisdom. "I was angry, defensive, convinced I was being scapegoated for following industry norms." Vanessa found herself leaning forward, recognizing her own feelings in his words. "What changed for you?" she asked when he paused. Michael smiled sadly. "Rock bottom. No one would hire me. My wife left, partly because I became bitter and unpleasant to be around. I had to confront the possibility that maybe, just maybe, I was wrong." After the session, Vanessa approached Michael directly. "How did you rebuild?" she asked. "I can't even get interviews anymore." "It starts with genuine accountability," he replied. "Not the kind where you say sorry because you have to, but the kind where you truly understand the harm caused and take responsibility for it." He recommended a support group for former employees facing similar circumstances. Reluctantly, Vanessa attended her first meeting the following evening. The group met in a community center basement, a far cry from the upscale environments Vanessa had preferred. Among the 8 participants was Darnell Washington, a former retail manager who had been fired after racially profiling customers. "I didn't think I was doing anything wrong," Darnell explained during the sharing portion. "I was just following what I thought was good security practice, watching people who looked suspicious. It took losing my job to make me question what suspicious actually meant to me and why." As others shared similar stories, Vanessa felt her defenses beginning to crack. These weren't bad people. They weren't hateful or intentionally cruel. They were people who had absorbed and acted on biases so normalized they had become invisible, until consequences made them impossible to ignore. When her turn came, Vanessa found herself speaking with unexpected honesty. "I keep saying I was just doing what I was trained to do," she admitted. "But the truth is, no one ever explicitly trained me to treat black passengers differently. They didn't have to. I just knew that's what was expected." "That's how systemic racism works," Darnell observed. "It doesn't require explicit instructions. It's in the water we swim in." The weeks that followed brought gradual but significant shifts in Vanessa's perspective. She began volunteering at a community center in a predominantly black neighborhood, initially to fulfill community service requirements, but eventually finding genuine connection and purpose there. She befriended Letitia Coleman, a kindergarten teacher who patiently answered questions Vanessa had never dared to ask before. "I'm not Google for white people," Letitia joked when Vanessa's questions became too numerous. "But I appreciate that you're trying to learn." 3 months after the incident, Vanessa sat at her computer staring at a blank email. The recipient field contained Dominic Wilson's business address, which his assistant had provided after Vanessa's 3rd request. The subject line read, "A genuine apology and request." It had taken hours to craft the message, deleting and rewriting sentences, questioning her motives, examining her words for any hint of the defensive attitude that had characterized her initial responses. "Mr. Wilson," she wrote, "I am writing to offer a sincere apology to you and especially to your daughter Zoe for my discriminatory behavior on Flight 237. My actions were harmful and inexcusable, reflecting biases I am only now beginning to fully recognize and address. These months have been a difficult but necessary journey of self-examination. I've come to understand that what I did to Zoe wasn't an isolated incident, but part of a pattern of treating passengers differently based on appearance, a pattern I was blind to because it was so normalized in my environment and my upbringing. This isn't an excuse, but context for what I've been learning through mandated training, support groups, and community involvement. I now recognize the profound impact such treatment has, especially on children who are still forming their sense of self and their place in the world. I've learned about the concept of windows and mirrors, how children need both to see themselves reflected positively in their environment, mirrors, and to gain perspective on others' experiences, windows. What I provided Zoe that day was a distorted mirror showing her she was less valued, less worthy of comfort than others. The thought of this brings me deep shame. I don't expect or deserve forgiveness. However, I wanted you to know that your actions have catalyzed genuine change, not just in corporate policy, but in individual lives, including mine. I've enclosed my application to your new training program. I understand if my participation would be unwelcome, but I believe my experience and new perspective might be valuable in helping others recognize and address their own biases before they cause harm. Whether or not that opportunity is appropriate, please know that I am committed to continuing this journey of growth and accountability, and to using my experience to prevent others from causing the same harm I did. With sincere regret and gratitude for the difficult lessons, Vanessa Taylor. Her finger hovered over the send button for several long moments before she finally pressed it. The message disappeared into the digital ether, its impact unknown. That evening, Vanessa attended her support group with a lighter heart. For the first time since the incident, she felt not just shame over what had happened, but hope about what might come next. Not a return to her old life, but the creation of something new and potentially more meaningful. "I sent a letter today," she shared with the group. "I don't know if it will make any difference to the person receiving it, but writing it made a difference to me." As she spoke, her phone buzzed with an incoming email. She ignored it until after the meeting, then checked it while waiting for her bus. The subject line read, "A genuine apology and request." The sender, Dominic Wilson. 6 months after the blanket incident, Celestial Airways had undergone a remarkable transformation. The once stodgy corporate headquarters now featured an expansive wall in the main lobby showcasing the company's new core values: equity, respect, inclusion, community, accountability. Each value was illustrated not with corporate stock photos, but with authentic images of staff members demonstrating these principles in action. Dominic Wilson stood before this wall, accompanied by industry journalists touring the facility. "These aren't just words to us," he explained. "Their commitments were held accountable for every day, at every level of the organization." The changes went far beyond cosmetic adjustments. New training protocols had been implemented across all departments, with particular emphasis on customer-facing roles. Anonymous testers regularly traveled on Celestial flights, documenting their experiences and providing feedback that directly impacted employee evaluations and company policies. Most significantly, leadership had been completely restructured. Thomas Bradshaw and his old guard were gone, replaced by a diverse executive team that better reflected the passengers they served. Sandra Johnson, whose steady presence had been so crucial to Zoe during the incident, now served as Chief Customer Experience Officer, bringing her perspective and wisdom to systems-level decisions. "Our approach is proactive rather than reactive," Sandra explained to the journalists. "We're not waiting for complaints to identify problems. We're actively seeking out opportunities to create more equitable experiences for all passengers." In the company's design studio, 6-year-old Zoe Wilson sat at a child-sized desk, colorful drawings spread before her. She had become an unlikely consultant for the airline's new Sky Friends Children's Amenity Program, an initiative ensuring that young passengers in all ticket classes received comfort items and entertainment options. "I think every kid should get a blanket if they're cold," Zoe explained seriously to the design team. "And the blankets should have stars on them because we're up in the sky close to the stars." The designer nodded, making notes. "That's a wonderful idea, Zoe. What else would make flying better for kids?" As Zoe enthusiastically shared her ideas, Dominic watched from the doorway, his heart full. The incident that had caused his daughter pain had ultimately created positive change for countless children who would never know her name. His assistant appeared at his side, discreetly indicating it was time for his next meeting. Dominic nodded and stepped away, heading toward the boardroom where an unexpected visitor waited. Vanessa Taylor sat nervously, hands folded in her lap. The 6 months since her firing had changed her visibly. The rigid perfection of her appearance had softened. Her hair, once pulled back severely, now fell in natural waves around her face. Her expression carried humility rather than defensive pride. "Taylor," Dominic greeted her, extending his hand. "Thank you for coming." "Thank you for the opportunity," she replied, her voice steady despite her obvious nervousness. Dominic took a seat across from her. "Your application to our training program was unexpected. The review committee had mixed opinions, as you might imagine. But your letter was compelling, as were the recommendations from your community service supervisors." Vanessa nodded. "I understand the hesitation. If I were in your position, I'm not sure I'd trust me either." "Trust is earned," Dominic agreed, "which is why I wanted to meet personally before making a decision." Their conversation was interrupted by a soft knock at the door. Sandra entered, leading Zoe by the hand. "You asked us to join you?" Sandra said, her expression carefully neutral as she recognized Vanessa. "Yes," Dominic confirmed. "Zoe, do you remember Ms. Taylor from our flight?" Zoe studied Vanessa with the direct gaze of childhood, unclouded by adult pretenses. "You're the lady who wouldn't give me a blanket," she said simply. Vanessa felt tears pricking at her eyes. "Yes," she admitted, "I am. and I'm very sorry for how I treated you. It wasn't fair, and it wasn't right." "Why did you do it?" Zoe asked. The question children so often ask that adults hesitate to answer honestly. Vanessa took a deep breath. "I made a mistake. I treated you differently because of how you look, and that was wrong of me. Everyone deserves to be treated with kindness and respect." Zoe considered this. "My teacher says when we make mistakes, we should say sorry and try to do better next time." "Your teacher is very wise." Vanessa smiled tentatively. "That's what I'm trying to do now." "The question," Sandra interjected, her protective instincts evident, "is whether that effort is genuine or simply motivated by self-interest." It was a fair challenge. Vanessa turned to face her directly. 6 months ago, I would have said whatever I thought you wanted to hear to get my job back. Today, I'm not asking for my old position. I'm asking for a chance to help prevent others from making the same mistakes I did. The change in me is real, but I understand why you would doubt that." Dominic observed the exchange thoughtfully. "Vanessa has applied to help develop our new training program, specifically to share her perspective on how bias operates in customer service settings. The question is whether that role is appropriate, given history." Zoe, who had been listening intently, spoke up with the disarming clarity of childhood. "In my book, the dragon who was mean becomes good and helps the knights protect the village, instead of burning it down." The adults exchanged glances, surprised by the wisdom in her simple analogy. "Sometimes," Dominic said carefully, "people who have made mistakes have unique insights that can help prevent those same mistakes in others. But it's also important that everyone feels safe and respected in their workplace." Sandra studied Vanessa for a long moment. "I believe in second chances," she said finally, "but with clear expectations and accountability." 2 weeks later, Vanessa Taylor stood nervously before a room of new Celestial Airways flight attendants. She wore not a uniform but simple business attire, a name badge identifying her as a training consultant rather than staff. "My name is Vanessa Taylor," she began, "and I'm here to share a difficult story about bias, accountability, and the journey toward genuine change." As she spoke, the room listened with rapt attention. Her story, unsparing in its honesty about her actions and their impact, became a powerful teaching tool, more effective than any theoretical training module could be. Across town, at Celestial Airways' main terminal, a special event was underway. The company was launching its new Sky Friends program with a ceremonial first flight. Children from diverse backgrounds had been invited to experience the enhanced services, with Zoe Wilson serving as honorary junior flight director. Dominic watched proudly as his daughter, wearing a miniature version of a flight director's uniform, handed out star-patterned blankets to each child boarding the demonstration flight. "Everyone gets one," Zoe explained seriously to the assembled media, "because everyone deserves to be warm and comfortable when they fly, no matter what." The event was covered by major networks, with industry analysts noting that Celestial's transformation had already influenced policies at competing airlines. What had begun as a PR crisis had evolved into a leadership opportunity, with Celestial Airways receiving an industry award for its revolutionary approach to corporate culture. "We're just getting started," Dominic told reporters. "Meaningful change isn't accomplished in months, but maintained through years of consistent effort and accountability." At the training center, Vanessa had found unexpected purpose in her new role. Rather than hiding from her past actions, she used them as powerful teaching moments, helping other employees recognize and address their own biases before they manifested in harmful behavior. What happened to Zoe Wilson wasn't an isolated incident, she would tell each new class. It was the product of systems and assumptions that had gone unchallenged for too long. My journey isn't about redemption. It's about responsibility. The transformation extended to every aspect of the airline's operations. New hiring practices had increased diversity at all levels. Customer satisfaction scores had risen dramatically across all demographic groups. Employee retention had improved as staff reported feeling more aligned with the company's values. 6 months later, at Celestial's annual company event, Employees gathered to celebrate their collective achievements. The highlight was the unveiling of a new initiative, Equal Dignity, a comprehensive industry-wide standard for equitable customer service that Celestial had developed and was now sharing openly with competitors. As part of the ceremony, flight attendants demonstrated the new boarding process, with Zoe once again helping to distribute blankets to children representing the diversity of their passenger base. "When I grow up," Zoe announced to her father as they watched the demonstration, "I want to be the boss of the sky like you." Dominic smiled, lifting his daughter into his arms. "You can be anything you want to be, sweetheart. And thanks to you, the sky might be a little more welcoming place for everyone by then." As the event concluded, Dominic stood at the podium looking out at the faces of his employees, a significantly more diverse group than 6 months earlier. Among them was Vanessa Taylor, no longer defined by her mistake, but by her commitment to growth and change. Nearby stood Sandra Johnson, whose courage and wisdom had helped transform not just a company, but an industry. Together, they represented what was possible when discrimination was confronted directly, when accountability led to authentic change, and when a painful incident became the catalyst for creating a more equitable world, one flight, one interaction, one blanket at a time. This powerful story teaches us that discrimination often operates in subtle ways that many don't recognize until confronted directly. It shows how privilege and power structures enable bias to persist unchallenged in corporate environments. No amount of wealth or status can fully shield people of color from experiencing discrimination, but having a platform allows for creating meaningful change. The journey reveals how systemic racism doesn't require explicit instructions. It becomes embedded in unofficial policies and company cultures. True transformation requires more than just firing individuals. It demands examining and dismantling entire systems that permit discriminatory behavior. Vanessa's evolution demonstrates that genuine accountability includes acknowledging harm, understanding root causes, and committing to growth. Her story reminds us that redemption isn't about erasing past mistakes, but using them to prevent future harm. Most importantly, the story highlights how children like Zoe experience discrimination's painful impact, yet also possess wisdom about fairness that adults often lose sight of. Their perspective can guide us towards simpler, more equitable solutions. Change is possible when leaders have the courage to confront uncomfortable truths, listen to marginalized voices, and implement systemic solutions rather than symbolic gestures. True justice isn't merely punitive. It creates transformation that benefits everyone. Has discrimination ever touched your life or someone you care about? Have you witnessed small acts of bias that others dismissed as no big deal? Share your experience in the comments below to continue this important conversation. If this story moved you or made you think differently about everyday interactions, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories that challenge us to create a more equitable world. What would you have done if you were in Dominic's position? Would you have given Vanessa a second chance? Let us know by commenting "forgive" if you support his decision, or "consequences" if you think she should have faced more penalties. Thank you for watching and being part of this conversation. Remember that creating change begins with awareness, continues with accountability, and flourishes with action. Together, we can build a world where no child is made to feel less worthy because of how they look.